Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I'm super excited to be participating in a blog hop for the Simon Says Stamp Among the Stars release. There is a whole bunch of fabulous designers participating in this. So I'm using some new stamps and dies from this release, and I've started with the Tropical Leaves stamp set, and I decided to do some watercolor stamping. I've shown this in different videos using different stamps. It's basically an experiment every time. So I just have some low Cornell watercolors. These are really cheap watercolors. They're kind of chalky, these are not high end at all, but they're great for this technique. And you get such a good variety of colors for such a great price. So all I'm doing here is I'm kind of experimenting and just going with it. And you do need to experiment with how much water you use, how wet you apply the watercolor. But I'm just mixing it up with my brush, and I'm using a silver size 6 brush. Honestly, the quality of the brush doesn't really matter with this technique. And I'm applying the watercolor to the stamp and then stamping it. A couple times I'll stamp it twice before inking up the stamp again with the watercolor. And like I said, you need to experiment with how much water to use, how little to use, because sometimes it'll get splotchy, sometimes it won't. You will not ever get like a perfect impression with this. It is meant to be messy and it's just fun. So I went along and stamped several of the different bases of leaves onto a piece. This is some Canson XL watercolor paper. And then there's layering images also in this set. So I took those and I added a different shade of green. Some of it I was mixing up different colors of green, kind of mixing some greens together, adding yellow, really just playing with it. And then I would stamp the second layer of the image over top of it. And then I mixed up a little bit of this kind of pale sandy brown color and then a green, and I just loaded up my brush really heavily with the color and then tapped it against my fingers to create the splatters. And I set that aside to dry and actually went off and did something else. And when I came back to it, I was like, it needed something. It was just kind of too pale, I guess is what I was thinking. I don't know. It just didn't look right. So I loaded up my brush again with some black and that really dark gray and just mixed up and really loaded my brush with this and heavily splattered this little background piece I've created, tapping against my fingers. I had splatters everywhere. I have it all over my desk. It's all over everything. So I really went kind of to town. I knew I wanted to use some black cardstock, so I kind of wanted to pull in the black with all this splatter, and it just kind of finished it off for me. So I let that splatter thumbs up for it and set that aside to dry. And then once it was completely dry, I'm going to run this through my die cut machine with, this is an A2 sized die from the MFT. This is a Blueprints 25 Dynamics. I just like it because it cuts it to an A2 size, so 4¼ by 5½ with a stitched edge. So I ran that through with that, and then I'm using the Stitch Flags dies, and I die cut some black cardstock with that. And then I want to use this sentiment from the new Uplifting Thoughts stamp set from Simon's Among the Stars release. I love this set. Love. Must have. You guys know I'm a sucker for sentiments, and this is such a great set. All the sentiments I just love. And it also even comes with a few little images. So anyway, I wanted to make sure the stamp fit on the die cut where I wanted it. And then I ran the die cut through a second time to die cut the far left edge of it. So I've got stitching all the way around this die cut here. And it's the perfect size for the sentiment. So then I treated this black cardstock with some anti-static powder so that the embossing powder only clings to the stamped image. And I stamped the sentiment with Versamark ink, so a clear sticky ink. And then I'm pouring some detail white embossing powder over a coffee filter so that I can funnel all that back into the container. And then I'm going to melt that with my heat tool. And once it's melted, I let it sit for just a few seconds until it's cooled off. And then I rub off that anti-static powder with my fingers. And then I just applied some foam tape to the back of this and adhered it directly to this background I created. And then as a final little bit of embellishment, I just have some random enamel dots in my stash. So I picked out kind of an aqua teal color, a green, and a black to add to that. And then that's it. No more embellishments. I wanted to kind of keep this card more masculine and kind of focus more on the watercoloring. So then I applied adhesive to this and I adhered it to a top folding A2 heavyweight white note card here. And then to finish off the inside, I should have done this while I had everything out, everything wet, but with me, I'm just flying by the seat of my pants. So I wanted to stamp one of the leaves again using the same technique. So I just pulled out the watercolors again, quickly painted one of these stamps. That's part of it too, is when you experiment with this, like it looks completely different on regular cardstock versus watercolor paper. So experiment with it. It's fun. I kind of liked how this turned out. So I did that, and then the layering piece, I did the same thing just with a different shade of the watercolors. And then I quickly dried that with my heat tool. And I took another sentiment from the Uplifting Thoughts stamp set. And I used my Misty with this because I was pretty sure I was going to stamp over the watercolor piece, and I wanted to make sure I got the sentiment stamped perfectly since I already had adhered the outside. So I had to make sure this was perfect. So I used my mini Misty so I can get the stamp lined up, and I'm using the little grid to make sure my stamp is perfectly straight. Fiddled around with the layout and decided where I wanted to stamp it. And I'm going to ink up this stamp with Simon Says Stamps Intense Black ink. And this is where the Misty came in perfectly because I did need to stamp it a second time because it was such a dense sentiment. So inked it up a second time and then stamped that right on top. And that finished off my card. So I will have a link below the video to my blog post, which will have links to everyone else on the hop. So make sure to check that out, as well as links to all the supplies used, this release, all that fun stuff. So check out the description box below the video if you're interested in any of that and seeing what everyone else made, because it's fabulous. Thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping, and commenting on my videos. And I will catch you all very soon in the next one. Bye.